Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. This is part one of our two-part series on languages of the cosmos. With me is Nancy du Tertre, who is the author of How to Talk to an Alien. She is also the author of Psychic Intuition, everything you wanted to ask, but were afraid to know. In addition, she's a corporate attorney specializing in securities litigation. She's a spiritual medium and a practicing psychic detective and remote viewer. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Amongst your many other talents is that you're endeavoring to establish a new discipline that we might think of as exolinguistics.
Yes, I am definitely thinking of it as exolinguistics.
Mm-hmm.
It is if I were to describe the field, it is a exo meaning off or off-planet, linguistics, the study of language, so it would be the study of alien languages.
Mm-hmm.
And I always use the word alien. I'll apologize in advance to your viewers and everybody else, but I get very politically incorrect. I will say psychic instead of, intuitive. I'll say alien instead of visitor, star person, whatever. Abductions instead of contact.
Well, We're calling this interview series Languages of the Cosmos, and the reason I wanted to have kind of a larger feeling towards it is because in your work you include communication with angels, communication with what some people might consider demonic entities. You're looking at ritual magic from the Middle Ages and the High Renaissance. You're looking at many, many different threads, mediumistic channelings of other languages. So you seem to be suggesting that there's a common thread that runs through all of these mysterious languages that come from multiple sources.
I think the way they get reported is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They are what you might call nonsense languages because they come through. We don't know what they mean. Some people are speaking them. Some people are channeling and writing them. But the people who receive them will say that they got them from angels or demons or aliens and sometimes they'll describe which group of aliens, which species. So what I've tried to do is to be very non-judgmental about all of this, which means, I don't approach this from the point of view of, if it's coming from a demon, it's bad, bad, bad. How about we don't know what that entity is? Maybe it is negative. I do believe they're negative as well as positive entities out there. Look at the languages and then start to compare them across the ages. Did the angel who allegedly handed the mathematician John Dee, who was the astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I of England, he was busy praying on the second floor of some tower, and an angel shows up floating and hands him a quartz sphere. Now, he called that an angel. He then went on to trace what he called, it was a light language. He saw it as a yellow outline. He would trace it. It was given to him by this angel backwards. It was considered too powerful to deliver forwards. It became known as an Angelic or Enochian language based on the Book of Enoch.
And we might mention that John Dee was one of the foremost mathematicians of his era. He was also a practitioner of what people in that era thought of as ritual magic. He used the language to invoke spirits, as I recall.
The language was used to perform magical feats. And many of them were doing that. I mean, you had Paracelsus, who was roughly a contemporary of his, an alchemist.
And who was considered one of the founders of modern medicine, by the way.
Yes, of toxicology. And he used different types of angelic language. He had his own angelic language.
Yep.
I don't know how he acquired it, but he would use it in different talismans and things, healing mechanisms to give to people. Apparently it worked. But my point is, you take whatever the writing is, you don't put a judgment on it. Oh, it came from an angel. Oh, it came from I don't know what. It came from an alien. Start to match them up. Once you can see what the characters start to look like, then you have a basis for some comparison. And then you may be able to make a judgment about the source of those languages.
Now, you've looked at dozens and dozens of examples of this sort, and you've noticed certain commonalities or certain groupings of these languages.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to me. A lot of people who channel, say, aliens or alien writing, automatic writing, they'll say, oh, there's only one kind of alien and they only write this way. And that's not true. They come through many, many different ways. In my book, How to Talk to an Alien, I show examples. Some of them look very similar to the Mi'kmaq indigenous peoples in northern Canada on the East Coast. Some of them have symbols that are you can match up from different channeled writings, match them up with ancient Arabic Sabaean writings from 500 BC. Others you can match up with Sumerian. Others you can they look faintly Chinese. I've shown them to professors and people from all over the world. One of them that I thought looked Chinese, a Chinese professor looked at it and I said, is that Chinese? She said, no, not at all. But she flipped it over sideways and she said, but it looks Middle Eastern. And I thought, oh, gee, that's really interesting. Yes. But more than that, so you're seeing relationships with ancient human languages. You're seeing cross relationships between channeled languages across the centuries from angels or aliens. And you're also seeing you can match up the characters and languages from different channeled languages. I
know you found in certain instances some of the same characters coming through multiple sources.
Right. And one of the things I'm trying to suggest that people do, people tend to get very dismissive of especially the channeled work. It's psychic, it's automatic writing, it's dream work, it's whatever it is, it's subjective, throw it out. That's what any good scientist is going to do. I'm saying no. Put them back into the game because you can start to match them with the actual writings, artifacts that have writings or ancient languages. And then you start to find the commonalities. And they exist. It's absolutely fascinating.
So, in other words, you're thinking of the Rosetta Stone, or perhaps that there might actually be an authentic language underlying all of this. We might even learn how to interpret it.
My guess is that there are several what you might call authentic languages. I think you're dealing with many different races and species of aliens and or angels and or demons, but of entities within our spiritual universe. And I think that if you want to talk about a single language, the single language is probably simply thought on thought. It bypasses language, it bypasses auditory, it bypasses visual. That's the universal thought. It's fragmented into our different languages that we can understand with our different senses.
And, well, if we think of our normal earthly languages, each language seems to convey with it a sensibility about the world, would you say? As a person who is multilingual yourself? Yeah,
absolutely. I'm fluent in French. I speak a little German, a little Thai. But when I started learning other languages, I realized, of course, and this, there are things there's no way you can say them in another language. But it's a real thing. It's a real expression. It's a real sentiment, whatever it is. So you learn that your sense of reality actually alters. It's either expanded or constricted, not only by the syntax, the grammar, the format, but also the vocabulary of each different language.
Mm-hmm.
Language really shapes a tremendous amount of how we take in the world.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've mentioned when you think of aliens, you consider them basically to be multi-dimensional beings. So you see no point in distinguishing between what some people might call astral plane entities as opposed to aliens. That they're all part of a spectrum, I think, in your mind. Would that be correct?
I don't claim to have enough information to know. I can only say that given what I understand about shape-shifting abilities,
yes,
and the ability to communicate on different ladders of communication, okay? I'm not willing to say that they're all the same, nor am I willing to say they're all different. I don't know enough.
Yeah. Well, when we think of aliens, it's fair to say that we live in an era where there is enormous controversy. Some people think that it's all a product of the subconscious mind and human imagination, and other people think, oh no, the U.S. government has been engaging in diplomatic relations with alien races from other planets for generations. At this point, I think between you and me, the wisest perspective is to say, we don't know what we don't know. It's something of a mystery.
I've heard enough stories through enough people firsthand to be just convinced that they are among us, with us, and we're dealing with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, fair enough. I have to tell you, I've had many experiences myself that might convince another person, but I don't feel quite that convinced yet. But at the same time, even aliens or no, it strikes me that what we're looking at here when we examine these languages is the cosmos is speaking to us, whether it's through our subconscious mind. You even go so far as to suggest that crop circles that are created fraudulently by people who admit that they went out and faked them could actually have been motivated by, some might say it's a subconscious urge, other people might say it's a manipulation by some sort of outside intelligence.
First of all, I have to say, between me and my husband, who's very skeptical about everything, crop circles are the only things that he says, absolutely, they're alien. I, on the other hand, I'm pretty wide open when it comes to most things, but crop circles always kind of troubled me a little bit. And I met somebody, this was a very long time ago, who claimed, we went to a place in England known to be sort of a hangout for locals involved in crop circles. This guy said he was making them. He said he was drawn to them at first because he'd been told they were aliens making. He was very disappointed when he found out they weren't. He said there's a group of maybe 50, 60 people making them. But what he thought was odd was that very often he'd come up with the same concept for a crop circle one night on the same night that somebody else would in his group, or more. Or that they would be, as they're making them, in the dark, bumping into each other without knowing it, or being guided by the well-known orbs of light. So, yeah, why not? And if there's information such as, new Euclidean geometric theorems being provided, or what was the latest one was the astrophysicist from Canada who found one of them it's a pictorial representation of the number pi, even rounded up with a dot. They're interesting things. There's maybe information there, maybe alien information. Why not?
There's a famous book that was published around the turn of the 20th century called From India to the Planet Mars. Written by Theodore Flournoy, who was a psychologist in that era, the early era of psychology, and he worked with a spirit medium. I believe He called her Helene Smith. I'm not sure that was her actual name. And he concluded at the end of the day that the language she produced, which she claimed was a Martian language, was actually a product of her subconscious mind. And yet it was a rather well-elaborated, sophisticated language.
I have all kinds of problems with the way that he made that conclusion. I've read that. I don't know how he came to the conclusion of making a one-to-one correspondence between her letters, her Martian letters, or her Martian words, because he doesn't explain it in the book.
Right.
He sort of assumes it and then goes on and says, well, case closed. It looks just like French. We're done here.
And a skeptical interpretation, of course, would satisfy a lot of academics.
Of course. Well, he was already talking about her, what was there? He had some really great choice, like turn of the century words for, her romance fantasy, when she was talking about her trance deliveries. But what I did is I took her alleged Martian language, a little clip of it. I compared it to that of John Dee, the 16th century English
alchemist,
mathematician. And I said, oh, isn't that interesting? I found right off the bat, I think it was 3 or 4 virtually identical characters in their languages. Now, I don't know whether one alphabet was bigger than the other or whether they're related, but the fact that you could find so many identical characters suggests maybe his angel and her Martian are maybe communicating in a similar language.
Well, we live in an era where there are many different sources of individuals who claim to have had actual two-way conversations with aliens. Sometimes as a result of abductions. Sometimes it seems to be they were chosen or gifted with it. It could be channeling. It could be a chance encounter. Some of it is probably fake. Some of it might be deliberate misinformation. So the field is very, very cloudy.
Yeah.
I think you'd have to agree with
Absolutely.
that. So it makes the job of an exolinguist particularly difficult.
Right. It does. But you have to be up for the challenge because the reward that could be waiting potentially is huge. Because if we're dealing, of course, the reports of people being abducted all the time out of the bedrooms. We have reports from the military. The spaceships are allegedly violating our commercial and military airspace.
Yes,
they're
interfering with nuclear weapons.
Exactly. So it behooves us to be able to communicate with them, not just to receive their communication, but to be able to talk back. You can't do that unless you've spent some time thinking about what is their level of communication?
I think part of the problem may be, from the point of view of one well-known UFO researcher, Jacques Vallée, that it may well be that these aliens are deliberately deceiving us. He calls them messengers of deception, that they don't want us to know their intentions.
I think that we are, from everything I have ever read and heard from the many people I know who do communicate and who are in touch, there is a level of intelligence which is very advanced. What we might perceive as muddying up the water, or the people who say, well, when are they going to show up on the lawn of the White House? They can do it. Why don't they do it? Or for the skeptics on the crop circles, well, why don't they send us a radio message? Maybe they don't need to. Maybe there is information on so many different levels that they are responding. Maybe it is not muddied up as far as they're concerned. And can they shapeshift? I have no doubt. Do they have mind control abilities that are phenomenal, causing, for example, people who see spacecraft? I mean, it's classic. Everybody forgets to pick up their camera. Oops, why did I forget to do that? I've been trying to see a UFO for how many years? They don't.
Well, there are photographs.
Well, there are. No, but I'm saying, but people forget. Or if you get several people in a car, only a couple of them will see a craft that's right there.
Yeah.
Why is that? I believe they can manipulate our perceptive abilities.
Well, you get a lot of comparable phenomenon in different disciplines. You get it in the field of apparitions and ghosts, where you'll have several people may see an apparition,
Absolutely.
and other people in the same location may not.
Right.
Shamans in various cultures have long reported communication with what they call the star people. It's hard for me, it's hard to sort it all out. It seems like it's a vast universe and we know so little about it. But one thing is certainly clear, and that is that just in recent decades, we're learning more and more and more about relatively nearby planets in our section of the galaxy that seem to be capable of supporting life as we know it.
Yeah, and there's no reason to think that they're not visiting or that they can't be more advanced on many different levels. I mean, I do believe they are. From what I wrote about, I was trying to not only gather some information about how many different languages are we talking about, but also what I found very interesting was many of them, and I'm talking about aliens, alleged aliens, some of them speak with no accents, and some of them speak with incredibly difficult accents, and they've been described as anything from Scandinavian to Arabic to Chinese sounding accents or other planetary accents. There was one, and this is one of my favorite stories, this is from a well-known case in Italy that started in the 1950s, the W56 friendship case. It went on for about 40 years. And one of the aliens there, they allegedly lived in a 200-mile underground base beneath the Adriatic Sea. And they communicated with a local group of a town, as well as later many Europeans.
So there are many witnesses.
Many.
Of individuals who say that they spoke to aliens who came from this, did you say underwater or underground base?
Yes. And it was a collective, and they apparently had many different alien species all together, but one of them learned how to speak Italian by listening to old tapes of Mussolini. So I'm assuming he had a kind of a sharp type of a voice, and he would talk a bit like this. You know, and that's information.
Yeah.
That tells you that alien wasn't interacting a heck of a lot with actual other humans, wasn't picking up the nuances. But there were other aliens in that collective who had apparently really good understandings of puns, metaphors, nuances, which means they were interacting with humans. That's all data for us.
Yeah. So much of this data is mind-blowing, mind-bending. Another word might be unbelievable. It's so bizarre, so strange that typical people tend to, unless it's a story that they themselves have experienced, they just go into disbelief. It must make it very difficult for anybody attempting to do serious work.
I wrote, because I've gone through this from not being psychic to being trained psychic to being paranormal investigator and then finally into ufology.
Yes.
And I never thought any of them were connected. I wrote in my book, Psychic Intuition, I said something like, and I think I was talking about spirits, and I said, but if it came to a space alien, well, I'd have to see one if I were ever going to believe in it. Well, the time has come. And so here I am, but I understand being on that side of the bridge.
Yeah. Well, we live in an era where I think it's reasonable to say that our species is going to be reaching out to the stars it's only a matter of maybe a number of generations before we have starships of our own. If it's 100 years or 200 years, we'll be...
Or maybe now.
Or maybe now. Some people say it happened decades ago, as a matter of fact. I am skeptical, as I've said, but let me say, as many of our viewers may know, I've authored a book called The PK Man, and it's about a man named Ted Owens, who is the author of a book called How to Contact Space People. And in part 2 of our 2-part series, we're going to go into some detail into that 10-year investigation of mine and how you look at it from the perspective of exolinguistics.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Me too.
But as we finish up this interview, for most of our viewers who are probably a bit bewildered by all of this, do you have any final thoughts?
I think my final thoughts are to try and keep yourself as open as possible, eliminate fear, eliminate judgment, and look at this as any other scientific-ish exploration and see what it brings. You already have huge numbers in the American population, at least, people all over the world who know that this phenomenon is real.
In fact, there are huge numbers of people, I know this to be the case, large numbers, thousands and thousands of people who believe themselves to be alien in some way or another.
Yes, and I've met people like that also.
Mm-hmm. Well, Nancy du Tertre, thank you so much for sharing your explorations into exolinguistics with me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. And thank you for being with us. Be sure to check your listings for part 2 of this 2-part series on languages of the cosmos.